Close your eyes. Take a long, slow breath in. Hold it for just a moment and let it go. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing you need to solve. Nothing you need to remember. Nothing waiting for you on the other side of this night that cannot wait a little longer. You are here and you are still, and the world outside can take care of itself for a few hours. Let your body settle into wherever you are resting. Feel the weight of your head, the weight of your shoulders, the slow, comfortable heaviness spreading down through your arms and your legs and into the tips of your fingers. With every breath, that heaviness deepens. With every breath, the distance between you and sleep grows a little smaller. I'm going to take you somewhere. Somewhere that no longer exists in the way it once did. Somewhere so beautiful that the people who saw it before it was gone have spent the rest of their lives trying to find words for it, and mostly failing, because there are places in the world whose beauty exceeds what language was built to carry. We are going to the Colorado River, not the Colorado as it is now. Wide and controlled and measured, its flow divided among 7 states by a system of treaties and dams and diversions as complex as anything humans have ever built. We are going to the Colorado as it was before all of that, as it was for 5 million years before a single human being stood on its banks and decided that what they were seeing needed to be changed. We are going specifically to a place called Glen Canyon, and we are going there in the summer of 1956 on the last days before the world changed. Breathe slowly, in and out, in and out. The story is long, and the night is long, and there is nowhere else to be. Glen Canyon sits in the Colorado Plateau, in what is now southern Utah and northern Arizona. It is a canyon, or rather it is a system of canyons, a vast and intricate network of side canyons and alcoves and narrows and open stretches, carved over millions of years by the Colorado River working its patient, inexorable way through sandstone and shale. The rock of Glen Canyon is Navajo sandstone. It is a warm, reddish-orange stone laid down in enormous cross-bedded layers that record the ancient dunes of a desert that existed here 200 million years ago, when this part of the world was a vast sandy waste, not unlike the Sahara. Over time, those dunes were buried and compressed and cemented into stone, and then the land rose, slowly, imperceptibly, over millions of years. And the river began its work, cutting downward through the stone at a rate of perhaps 1/1000th of an inch per year, finding the softer layers, following the fault lines, creating a canyon that by the time humans arrived was nearly 200 miles long, and in places more than 700 feet deep. The color of the stone is something people who have seen it never quite get over. In the morning, when the first light comes over the rim and strikes the canyon walls, the stone glows, not reflects but seems to generate its own warmth, as if the millions of years of desert sun that went into making it have been stored there and are now being released. The color shifts through the day, from deep red in the early morning to orange at midday, to a pale amber in the afternoon, to a deep rose, and then a purple as the sun goes down and the shadows climb the walls. At night, under a full moon, the canyon walls are silver, and the river moves through all of it, always moving, always the same river, and never the same river. Green and cold in the deep pools, and quick and brown and busy in the shallows, braided around sandbars in the wider stretches, and compressed to a rushing urgency in the narrows. You are there now. standing at the river's edge in the summer of 1956. Let the image come slowly, the way images come in dreams. It is early morning. The canyon walls rise above you on both sides, enormous walls of red and orange sandstone, their upper edges catching the first light, while the canyon floor is still in shadow. The air down here at river level is cool and damp, carrying the smell of the river. A mineral smell, a sand smell, the particular clean, cold smell of water that has come a long way through stone. The river is about 100 feet wide at this point. It moves with purpose, the current visible on the surface as a series of slow, muscular curves, the water green, where it is deep and pale where it runs over the sand. On the far bank, a great blue heron stands at the water's edge, absolutely still, its reflection perfect in the quiet water near shore. It has been standing there for some time. It will stand there for some time more. The heron has all the patience of something that has never been taught to hurry. Behind you, the canyon opens into a small beach of fine red sand. The sand is still cool from the night, and it holds the shapes of the things that crossed it in the dark. The three-toed tracks of a heron, the paired prints of a kangaroo rat, the sinuous trail of a sidewinder that passed through sometime before dawn and left its signature in the sand and then was gone. Above the beach, the canyon wall rises in a great sweeping curve of smooth sandstone, polished by water and wind over centuries until it is almost like the inside of a bowl. A concave surface of warm red stone that catches the sound of the river and holds it, so that down here at the bottom of the canyon, the sound of the water is everywhere and nowhere, present in the stone itself. You sit on the sand and listen. The heron does not move. The river does not stop. The light is coming. Breathe in the cool morning air. Let your thoughts go wherever they want to go, and then let them drift away, like leaves on the current. The people who knew Glen Canyon best were the ones who came through it by river, from the late 1800s through the middle of the 20th century. A small and particular kind of person made the journey down the Colorado through Glen Canyon. Explorers, scientists, photographers, writers, river guides, and ordinary people who had heard enough about the place to want to see it for themselves. They came in wooden boats at first, and then in rubber rafts, floating through 200 miles of canyon over the course of several weeks, camping on the sandbars at night and exploring the side canyons during the day. What they found was not one canyon, but hundreds. Glen Canyon was a system, an impossibly complex, endlessly varied system of spaces that opened one into another in ways that seemed designed. Though, of course, they were not designed, but only discovered, found by the river following the path of least resistance through the stone over millions of years. There were side canyons so narrow that you had to turn sideways to enter them, the walls rising on either side to a strip of blue sky 30 or 40 feet above your head, the stone so close you could touch both walls at once. The light in these narrows was indirect, filtered, turning everything a deep rose or a deep gold, depending on the time of day. The sound of the water, if water was running, was compressed and amplified, filling the narrow space entirely. There were alcoves, enormous curved shelters in the canyon wall where the stone had been eaten away by seeping water over thousands of years, leaving great concave spaces that could hold 100 people in their shade. The walls of these alcoves were marked with desert varnish, a dark, almost black coating of manganese and iron oxide that formed on the rock face over millennia, wherever water seeped through. On the desert varnish, the ancient people who had lived in this canyon had left their marks. Petroglyphs, figures carved into the dark coating to reveal the lighter stone beneath. Hands, animals, spirals, human figures in postures of ceremony or hunt or simply being. These marks were thousands of years old. They had been there long before the Spanish came, long before the United States existed, long before anyone anywhere in the world had ever heard of a place called Glen Canyon. And in the summer of 1956, they were still there. Close your eyes a little more completely. Let the canyon hold you. There is more to see. The ancestral Puebloans lived in Glen Canyon and its surroundings for more than 1,000 years. They were farmers and hunters and craftspeople, and they built their homes in the sheltered alcoves of the canyon walls. Small, precise structures of stone and mud mortar tucked into the cliff faces at heights that required the knowledge of the rock face to reach, that were accessible by handholds carved into the stone, or by ladders that could be pulled up after the inhabitants had climbed to safety. These cliff dwellings were not ruins in the way that word usually implies something broken and lost. They were simply empty. The people who had built them had moved on, following the patterns of drought and water that governed life on the Colorado Plateau, and the dwellings they left behind were preserved by the dry desert air with an almost uncanny completeness. The wooden beams that supported the roofs were still intact. The mud plaster on the interior walls still showed the marks of the hands that had smoothed it. In some of the alcoves, the cobs of ancient corn were still piled in the storage rooms, desiccated and hard and perfectly preserved after 800 years. The river guides who floated through Glen Canyon in the 1950s would stop at these sites and let their passengers climb up to see them. They would sit in the shade of the alcove and eat their lunch and look out through the opening at the river below, at the canyon walls on the far side, at the strip of blue sky above, and try to imagine what it had been like to live here, to wake up every morning in this space, to look out at this view, not as a visitor, but as a resident, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belonged. The canyon had been home. It had been home to people whose names we do not know, who spoke languages that are now gone, who looked at the same walls and the same river and the same sky and found in it everything they needed. And in the summer of 1956, their homes were still there, still tucked into the cliff faces, still looking out at the river. Breathe slowly. Your body is heavy and warm. The canyon is all around you, its walls rising on both sides, its river moving steadily below. Let me tell you about a place called Music Temple. It was a side canyon, not large, perhaps 200 feet deep and 100 feet wide at its widest point. You entered it from the river through a narrow opening in the canyon wall, wading through a shallow stream that ran along its floor. And as you went deeper, the walls curved inward and upward until they formed a kind of dome above your head, a natural amphitheater of smooth red stone, open at the top to a circle of sky. The acoustics in Music Temple were extraordinary. The curve of the walls and the shape of the dome created a space where sound behaved differently than it did anywhere else. A single voice, speaking at a normal volume, filled the entire space with a warm, resonant presence. Music, Any instrument, any voice, became something more than itself in Music Temple. It acquired a depth and a fullness that seemed to come from the stone itself, as if the canyon were joining in. John Wesley Powell, the first European American to float the Colorado through the Grand Canyon, passed through Glen Canyon in 1869 and camped in Music Temple with his crew. He named it. He wrote about it in his journal with the careful, precise excitement of a scientist who has encountered something for which his science has not prepared him. He described the way the sound moved in the space. He described the light. He described sitting in the sand on the floor of the alcove while one of his men played a harmonica, the music expanding and deepening until it seemed to belong to the canyon rather than to the man playing it. Powell carved his name in the wall of Music Temple along with the date, 1869. In the decades that followed, others who came through Glen Canyon stopped at Music Temple and did the same. The wall slowly accumulated names and dates: river runners, explorers, tourists, scientists, all of them compelled by the same impulse to leave a mark in this particular place, to say, "I was here," in the same way that the ancient people had said, "I was here," on the desert Varnish 1,000 years before. The most recent name carved in the wall of Music Temple, before the water came, was carved in 1963. The water reached Music Temple in 1964. It is still there, underwater. The curved walls, the dome, the circle of sky above, the stream on the floor, the names on the wall from 1869 to 1963. All of it still there, in the dark, and the cold, and the silence, holding its extraordinary acoustics for no one, resonating with nothing. Breathe in and out. The story continues. In the spring of 1956, the United States Congress authorized the Colorado River Storage Project. It was a massive undertaking, a system of dams and reservoirs designed to control the flow of the Colorado River, generate hydroelectric power, and store water for the rapidly growing cities and farms of the American Southwest. The centerpiece of the project was to be a dam at Glen Canyon, a concrete arch dam 710 feet tall, one of the tallest dams in the world. The dam would create a reservoir. The reservoir would be called Lake Powell, named for John Wesley Powell, the man who had named Music Temple and carved his name in its wall. The reservoir would be enormous. When full, it would stretch back through Glen Canyon for nearly 200 miles, its surface covering more than 250,000 acres. Its depth at the dam face reaching nearly 600 feet. Everything in Glen Canyon, the side canyons, the alcoves, the cliff dwellings, the petroglyphs, the sandbars, the narrows, the places where the ancient corn was still piled in the storage rooms, the wall where John Wesley Powell had carved his name in 1869, Music Temple, and its extraordinary acoustics and its accumulated names, all of it would go under the water. The decision had been made. The concrete was already being poured. And in the summer of 1956, a small number of people who knew what was coming made their way to the canyon to see it one last time. Let your breathing slow even further now. There is something important in this part of the story. Something about what it means to witness a place knowing that it is ending. One of those people was a man named Elliot Porter. Elliot Porter was a photographer, one of the finest nature photographers America has ever produced. He had come to Glen Canyon several times before and had been overwhelmed by it each time, by the quality of the light on the stone, by the intricacy of the side canyons, by the way the desert colors seem to intensify rather than wash out in photographs. He came back in 1961 with a large format camera and spent weeks in the canyon, photographing everything he could reach. He photographed the narrows in the late afternoon, when the indirect light turned the walls to gold. He photographed the desert varnish and the petroglyphs in the early morning, when the contrast was sharpest. He photographed the river from above and from below, from the sandbars and from ledges halfway up the canyon walls. He photographed the small things, the patterns of water on stone, the shapes of crystals in the rock face, the precise geometry of a dried mud flat on the canyon floor, cracked into polygons by the sun. He photographed the cliff dwellings in the early morning light when they were still in shadow and the canyon above them was already golden. And he photographed Music Temple. He stood inside it and looked up at the circle of sky at the top of the dome and made a photograph that shows the curved walls converging upward toward that circle of light, the stone glowing red and gold, the whole image carrying somehow, in the way that great photographs do, the quality of the sound that the space could make. His photographs were published in 1963 in a book called The Place No One Knew. The title was both a description and an accusation, because the argument that the book was making, the argument that Elliot Porter and the writer David Brower, who wrote the text, were making with every page, was that Glen Canyon had been sacrificed without being seen, that the decision to drown it had been made by people who had never been there, who had looked at maps and water tables and power generation estimates and had never once stood in Music Temple and listened to what a human voice could become in that space. The place no one knew. By the time the book was published, the dam was complete and the water was rising. By the time most people saw the photographs, the places in them were already underwater. Close your eyes. Let the images from those photographs drift through your mind. The curved walls, the circle of sky, the glowing stone, the river, always moving. There was a river guide named Ken Slight. He had been running the Colorado through Glen Canyon since the early 1950s, taking small groups of passengers through in rubber rafts, camping on the sandbars, exploring the side canyons, learning the river the way a person learns a language. Not all at once, but slowly, through immersion and repetition, until it becomes a way of thinking rather than just a body of knowledge. Ken Slight knew Glen Canyon the way a person knows their own house in the dark. He knew where the current ran strongest in the upper section, and where it slowed and spread in the wide stretches near the middle. He knew which side canyons had water in them in June and which were dry by August. He knew where the canyon wren nested in the cliff face above the river, and where the bighorn sheep came down to drink in the early morning, and where the ancient corn was stored in the cliff dwelling that most visitors never found because it required a particular knowledge of the rock face to reach. He knew Music Temple in every season and every light. When the dam was authorized in 1956, Ken Slight was 30 years old. He kept running the river. He kept taking passengers through, kept showing people the places they had never seen, kept watching the faces of people as they rounded a bend and saw something that no description had prepared them for. He kept doing this until 1963, when the rising water made it impossible. In those last years, he felt the changes before he could see them. The campsites that had always been dry and above the waterline began to flood in spring. The sandbars shifted. The side canyons that had been entered at ground level required wading and then swimming, and then were accessible only by diving beneath the surface. And then one morning in 1963, Ken Slight floated into a stretch of the canyon that he had floated through many times before, and the familiar landmarks were gone. The particular bend in the wall that marked the entrance to a side canyon he had taken passengers to 100 times, gone, under the water. The sandbar, where he had camped on his first trip through the canyon, where he had lain on his back in the sand and looked up at the strip of stars between the canyon walls. Gone. Just water. Still, green, risen water. He kept floating. He kept watching the walls descend into the water as the reservoir filled, watching the familiar shapes disappear one by one. The ledges, the alcoves, the bands of color in the stone that he had used to navigate, gone to 6 feet of water, then 12, then 20. Ken Slight left the canyon for the last time in October of 1963. He drove home to Escalante, Utah, and sat in his kitchen for a long time without doing anything in particular. Then he got up and he went on living. He became one of the most passionate advocates for wilderness protection in the American West. He spent the next 50 years fighting for the places that were left, the canyons and mesas and rivers that had not yet been dammed or drilled or paved. He was still doing it in his 90s, still arguing, still remembering, still carrying the canyon inside him like something that could not be taken even by water. Breathe slowly. The night is settling around you. You're getting closer to sleep. The river is still moving, somewhere far below the surface. Let us go back to the canyon one more time. It is the summer of 1962. The dam is built. The water has already begun to rise in the lower sections of the canyon, flooding the beaches and the lower alcoves, submerging the ancient campsites. But in the upper reaches of the canyon, in the stretches above the rising water, things are still as they were. You are there in the late afternoon. The light has gone golden. That particular late afternoon gold that the desert does better than anywhere else on Earth. A warm, thick, almost liquid light that seems to thicken the air and slow the world down. The canyon walls catch it and hold it, glowing with a depth of color that seems impossible for stone. Deep red and orange and amber, the colors shifting as the sun moves and the shadows climb. The river is below you. You are sitting on a ledge about 30 feet above the water, on a wide, flat shelf of sandstone that juts out from the canyon wall. The ledge is warm from the day's sun, and the warmth comes through the stone and into your body, into your legs, and your back. A deep, held warmth that the stone gives freely. Below you, the river moves. It is green in the deep channel and pale near the banks, and its surface is textured with the slow, muscular patterns of the current, moving always downstream, moving always toward the dam, and whatever lies beyond it. Across the canyon, the far wall is a masterpiece. It rises nearly 400 feet from the river to the rim, and its face is not smooth but articulated. Ledges and overhangs and vertical cracks running from the base to the top, each one casting a thin line of shadow in the afternoon light. The stone is cross-bedded the ancient dune layers visible as diagonal lines running across the face of the cliff, each layer a slightly different shade, the variation subtle but continuous, so that the whole wall seems to breathe with texture and variety. Near the top of the far wall, a ledge catches a strip of the late sun and glows almost white against the deeper orange of the stone above and below. A raven crosses the canyon. It moves without effort, without urgency, from one wall to the other, its wings barely moving, riding some current of air that is invisible from below. It passes through the column of late light that falls between the walls and is briefly illuminated, its black feathers catching the gold. And then it is in shadow again, and then it is gone, around the bend of the far wall. The canyon is quiet. The river makes its sound. The low, continuous rushing sound that is the background of everything in this place, present even in the deepest alcoves, even in the narrowest side canyons, even in Music Temple, where every sound becomes enormous. You sit on the warm stone and listen. The light is changing. The gold is deepening toward amber, toward rose, and the shadows are climbing the walls on the west side of the canyon, while the east side still holds the full warmth of the late sun. In an hour it will be dark, and the stars in a canyon like this, with no city light for 100 miles in any direction, with the canyon walls cutting off the horizon so that the sky is a narrow strip of intense black. The stars are something that has to be seen to be understood. They are not the stars you see from a city or even from the countryside. They are the stars as they actually are. Uncountable, layered, the Milky Way not a faint smudge but a river of light, dense and structured, arching across the strip of sky between the canyon walls with the same patient constancy as the river below. The ancient people who lived in this canyon saw those stars every night. They knew them. They navigated by them and planted by them and told stories about them. And some of those stories are still told today in the communities of the people who are descended from the ancestral Puebloans, communities that exist in the mesas and valleys surrounding the canyon country. The stories endure, the stars endure, the stone endures, even under the water. And you are here on this warm ledge in this last summer before the water rises to cover it. Let the warmth of the stone come through you. Let your thoughts drift upward with the last of the light. You are almost asleep. The water rose slowly. The Colorado River Storage Project had anticipated that it would take years to fill Lake Powell. The reservoir was simply too large to fill quickly, even with the entire flow of the Colorado directed into it. It began filling in March of 1963. It did not reach full pool, the level at which the reservoir was considered complete, until 1980. 17 years. For 17 years, the water rose through the canyon, filling the side canyons one by one as the level climbed, submerging the alcoves and the cliff dwellings and the petroglyph panels and the sandbars and the ledges and the narrow places where the walls turned to gold in the afternoon light. Music Temple went under the water in 1964. The alcove where the ancient corn was stored went under in 1966. The ledge where the canyon wren nested went under in 1968. The stretch of the river where the bighorn sheep came to drink in the early morning went under in 1971. The last of the upper canyon walls, the ones that had been high enough to remain above the waterline for years after the dam was closed, finally disappeared beneath the surface in 1980. And then the reservoir was full, and then the canyon was gone, not destroyed, not burned, or bulldozed, or built over, just covered, just held in the cold and the dark of 600 feet of water, as complete and as whole as it had ever been, its walls still glowing with their stored warmth, its alcoves still curving inward toward their back walls, its petroglyphs still precise on the desert varnish, just unreachable, just silent, just held. Breathe slowly. The weight of sleep is gathering around you now. There is just a little more to tell. In the decades since the reservoir filled, something unexpected has happened. The debate over Glen Canyon Dam, the argument about whether the canyon should have been sacrificed for water storage and power generation, has never really ended. It has, if anything, intensified. The photographs that Elliot Porter took in his final trips through the canyon have been seen by millions of people. The book David Brower wrote is still in print. The story of what was lost has passed through time the way important stories do, finding new audiences, new advocates, new people who look at the photographs and feel a grief for something they never saw. And occasionally, the canyon gives back glimpses of itself. In dry years, when the water level in Lake Powell drops significantly, and in recent decades as drought has become more severe and more prolonged, the water level has dropped a great deal. The upper reaches of the canyon begin to reappear. The walls emerge first. The pale ring of mineral staining that marks the old high water line appears on the canyon walls. A bathtub ring of bleached stone several hundred feet wide, and below it, the original red and orange of the Navajo sandstone is revealed, still warm, still glowing, still carrying the cross-bedded layers of the ancient dunes. And then the alcoves, and then the side canyons, and then, in the driest years, stretches of the canyon floor itself. The sediment-covered, water-worn rock of the canyon bottom, emerging from the reservoir into the air for the first time in decades. People who go to these places in the low water years, and they do go hiking in along the drawn-down shores of the reservoir, scrambling over the exposed sediment, report that it is a disorienting experience, that the canyon feels both familiar and strange. Familiar because the shape of it is the same. The walls, the curves, the alcoves, the geometry of the place. And strange because of the silence, because of the absence of the river, because of the sediment that covers the canyon floor like a gray blanket over everything that was once there. But the walls are still there. The stone is still there. And in some of the alcoves, in the places where the water has dropped enough and the sedimentation has not been too deep, the ancient structures are still visible, still standing, still facing outward toward the river that is no longer there, toward the view that is now the murky green of the reservoir, still waiting. The way things wait when they have been here long enough to understand that waiting is simply another form of endurance. Breathe in and out. The room around you is very quiet now. Your body is almost entirely asleep. There is only this canyon and this river and the long, slow endurance of stone. There is a time of day in the canyon that the river runners called the magic hour. It was not morning and not evening, but the transition between them. The time just after the sun had gone below the rim of the canyon on the west side, but before the sky had fully darkened, when the light that remained was entirely indirect, reflected from the upper canyon walls, turned by that reflection into something soft and even and deeply colored. During the magic hour, the canyon lost all of its shadows. The harsh contrasts of the middle of the day, the bright surfaces and the deep dark shadows, gave way to an evenness of light that revealed the texture of the stone without overemphasizing any part of it. The colors became richer and more complex. The cross-bedded layers in the sandstone were visible with a clarity that the direct sun of midday actually obscured. The desert varnish on the canyon walls was at its deepest, its almost black surface in perfect contrast to the warm orange of the stone around it. Everything was visible. Everything was equal. Nothing was in shadow. The river runners who experienced the magic hour tried to arrange their days so that they were on the water during it, not camped, not cooking, not setting up their gear on the sandbars, but actually on the river, floating through the canyon in the soft, even perfect light of that brief transition. And in that light, the canyon revealed itself most completely, not dramatically, not in the way of sunrise and sunset, with their intense colors and their rapidly changing effects, but quietly, steadily, with the patience of something that has been here long enough to know that the light will always come, and the right light will come, and all it has to do is be here when it arrives. You're in the canyon during the magic hour now. The light is even and warm and deeply colored. The walls rise above you on both sides, their surfaces clear and complex. The river moves below you, green and steady, its surface catching the indirect light and turning it to something almost silver. There is no sound but the river. There is no movement but the current. There is nothing required of you except to be here, in this light, in this canyon, on this river, in this moment that is both entirely specific. This canyon, this evening, this particular quality of light, and entirely outside of time, because this is how the light has come here every evening for 5 million years, and will come every evening for 5 million more. Let your eyes close. Let the light of the canyon come through your closed eyelids. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of the river. In and out, in and out. The river is still there. Beneath the reservoir, beneath 600 feet of cold, still water, the Colorado is still there. Not moving, its current stopped by the dam, its flow transformed from a river into a reservoir, but present, still occupying the same channel it has occupied for 5 million years, still enclosed by the same walls, still flowing in its way toward the same sea, just more slowly now, just more patiently. The canyon is still there. The walls are still there. The alcoves are still there. The petroglyphs are still there, their lines still precise on the desert varnish, still carrying whatever it was that the people who made them wanted to say, still waiting to be read by someone who will never come. Music Temple is still there. Its curved walls are still there, still shaped exactly as they were when John Wesley Powell stood inside them in 1869 and listened to his man play the harmonica. The acoustics are still there. The particular curve of the walls, the particular shape of the dome, the particular way sound would behave in that space if there were any sound to behave. There is no sound now. The water absorbed it long ago, but the capacity is still there, held in the geometry of the space, waiting. The names on the wall are still there. Powell, 1869. And all the others after him, down to the last one carved in 1963, the year before the water came. All of them still there in the dark. All of them still saying what they said. I was here. I was here. And it was beautiful. And I wanted to leave some mark of having been here, some small evidence that a human consciousness had stood in this space and been moved by it. I was here. Let that settle over you now, like water, like the slow, patient rising of something that covers everything gently, without violence, without haste, taking its time. You were here. Tonight, in this story, in this canyon, in this light, you were here. And the canyon held you the way it has held everything that has come into it. The ancient people, and the river runners, and the ravens, and the bighorn sheep, and the canyon wrens, and the water itself, with the patient, indifferent, absolute generosity of stone. Breathe in and out. Your body is completely still now. The canyon is all around you. The river is below you, moving in the dark. The stars are above you, between the canyon walls, uncountable and still. And the stone is warm beneath you, giving back the warmth it has held all day, the warmth it has held for 200 million years, the warmth of ancient suns, on ancient dunes, on an ancient earth that was already beautiful before there was anyone to see it. You can sleep now. You have seen the canyon. You have been in the magic hour light. You have heard the river. You have sat in the warmth of the Navajo sandstone and looked up at the strip of stars between the walls. And all of it, the canyon and the river and the light and the stone and the stars and the names carved in the walls of Music Temple and the ancient corn still stored in the cliff dwellings and the petroglyphs on the desert varnish, all of it is still there, under the water, in the dark, patient, enduring, whole. Sleep now. Let the weight of the canyon settle over you. Let the sound of the river carry you, in and out, in and out. The river is always moving. The stone is always there. And you are safe and warm and held in the canyon, in the dark, in the water, in the deep and patient silence of something that has been here forever and will be here long after everything else is gone. Sleep. The river is there. The stone is there. And you are there with them. Quiet. Still. Home. Sleep.